Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm Dev.
And I'm Hugh. And on today's show, we're looking at minute 26, which starts where we left off in the nursing home with Martin visiting his mother and carries on through to the end of that scene, pretty much. Joining us on today's show and all this week, we have Aaron of Out Now with Aaron and Abe, also writer at We Live Entertainment. We Live Entertainment or We Live?
We Live.
We Live Entertainment. Welcome to our podcast, sir.
Hello, hi. Thanks for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Excellent. And what's your? How did you come to this film originally?
How did I come to this film originally? Grosse Pointe Blank is one of my favorite movies ever. How I came to it is almost a mystery to me because it's 97, so I'm 11 at that time.
Oh wow!
Okay. Just something about like the because I didn't see it in theaters. I saw it when I rented it, and something about the very premise of it just immediately intrigued me. As like Hitman, cool. I'm into Hitman. High school reunion, interesting. John Cusack, I like him, and just everything about it resonated with me for whatever reason at the time, and it stuck with me in a way. Whereas I was getting more into movies, which I certainly was, like 99, 2000, I was really like solidifying. Like I love movies. That's one where the blend of it being like a cool Hitman movie of the 90s post Pulp Fiction combined with being like just a sharp screenplay that has things going on that are more than just like the Hitman aspect of it, but like Cusack's own sensibilities and whatnot. It just always kept it alive in my mind. So like it's one that's stuck with me for so long where it's like as I said, it's like it's one of my favorite movies ever, and it's hard to like it's hard to like explain why that is for like a movie like that, because you put it in such an esteem where it's like I just love it. Like I can break down every piece of this thing and tell you why I like this, that, and the other. But in terms of like why of all movies, 1997's Grosse Pointe Blank is like, this is one of the top 5 things of all time. Like that's it's like it's just there.
And I think that's kind of partly why I was wanting to do this podcast, because I feel exactly the same way. And I think there's quite a few of us that, I mean, I think you and I were born the same year. We were at the same point in time when this movie came out, and we have a very similar experience where we are introduced to this film so early that we don't necessarily have the same kind of critical analysis when we're first watching the movie. We just love the movie. And like you missed it in cinema, a little bit too young to go and actually see it in the cinema, but was a regular at the video rental store, getting the VHS and picked it up and loved it. And I think for me, like this entire Movies by Minute series is just an exercise in me trying to more deeply understand why I love this movie. So I'm psyched that you're on this journey with me.
I'm just happy to talk about this movie. Like, I've talked about Grosse Pointe like plenty of times at this point. So like now I'm doing like a minute by minute break. It's like, cool, I'm into that. Let me listen to that podcast. And yes, I would. But like, I guess we have a mutual friend, Jake Cluett, who immediately recommended me when he saw this as a Grosse Pointe Blank podcast because he knows me well enough. It's like, of course I would want to do this. I don't even request a time to do like what part of the movie. I'm like, whatever, just get me on the podcast. Like that sounds good to me. So.
and as a result, you've ended up with 5 of probably the most depressing minutes of the movie to enjoy.
Well, yeah. I mean, there is that thing that depression is definitely both a thing and a theme in this film. But I just wanted to ask you, before we carry on, given both of you came to it through VHS, just thinking back to the way things worked in the VHS era, would you say that there was a more, however much you love cinema and the experience of being in the theater, would you agree that when you have access to something like VHS as early as some of us did, that it made things fit slightly more personal when you found the film that you love because it's at home and you're not sharing the experience with anyone else? It's you and the screen.
It's a good question. The blunt answer is no,
Okay,
and
fair enough.
I'll say why. I'm a huge physical media collector. In
Hmm.
the room that I'm not in right now, I have like thousands of movies, and it's the
Yep,
kind of thing
same.
where what you're describing to me sounds a lot like nostalgic joy. Like there's something there where that like comes from because you started this relationship with a piece of media from like having a videotape of it or whatnot, that there's something that just feels a bit more tangible or what have you, that's set
Oh, hmm.
that's like different than like streaming something these days, and it's like you can't like form that same kind of bond. Like I grew up watching like Batman on VHS over and over again, to the point where like not only do you know Batman, but I know like the Diet Coke commercial that came on the VHS before Batman would even
Hmm.
start. It's
Hmm.
like that kind of thing where
Hmm.
there's something that I can treasure as far as that's a great memory for me, as far as why like part of why I have a certain relationship with Batman. But in
Hmm.
terms of do I like that movie more because I had it start that way, I'm not that person necessarily.
Sure. Okay.
There's a lot of movies like that in my, especially in my generation with '90s kids who similarly I think had VHS tapes or what have you,
Hmm.
where, and I talk about this on the podcast plenty, but like movies like Hook that have this kind of generational love, I just don't have it because
Yeah.
for one, I think Hook is terrible, but also I
Yeah.
just like
Absolutely.
that's never been how my mind has kind of functioned.
Okay.
I'm certainly
No,
not against it. I'm happy for anyone to enjoy things because they want to enjoy them. That's great.
sure.
If you
Sure.
if you have a relationship like that because of a whatever kind of callbacks you want to make for it, completely there with you. I enjoy that. Like that's not specifically me, but I completely understand the question you're asking. It's
Sure.
just like
I mean, because it's just one of those things where I can remember the first time. Because I'm old. I'm born in '71, and I can remember in the '70s it was if you were very fortunate to be near a shop that would rent you
uh
reels, reels of the film to project on someone's camera at home or at school or in the local hall, you had the ability to see a film again. But if not, it was TV or cinema. And in both cases, it was one and done, unless maybe there was a repeat on, or you could persuade your parents to let you go back to the cinema a second time to see the same thing. And when VHS really hit for me in the start of the '80s, huge obsession straight away because suddenly I realized all these possibilities, what I could get, what I could do. But there was something about looking back on where I lived with my parents at the time, and there was something about sitting in the lounge close enough so I can reach the control on the VHS player if the remote's not working, and being right up there with the warmth of the TV and the radiation bathing me,
uh
And there was something incredibly personal about a film I discovered that way. Much as I adored going to the cinema, much as I loved everything, so it's not so much about the object; it's about the experience,
for
the
sure. Yeah.
way that film is, because there was just nobody with me. It's just me and the film. And I find Grosse Pointe Blank weirdly is one of those films for me at least where I did see it in the cinema, and yet the impact was there, but it's it's watching it at home that really kind of cemented its place for me, and
And
I can't explain why. I
I,
really
I
can't.
I think the specialness of being sat in front of the TV was gone for Aaron and myself by
Mm-hmm.
the time we came around, because the TV was just ever present. It was just there, right? Whether it was
That's
VHS
fair.
or
Yeah.
watching on
Mm-hmm.
TV, it wasn't a special thing. Cinema still
Okay,
was a
fair.
special thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the discovery through cinema was generally special, but watching something on VHS was a little bit more mundane and on demand as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had the video rental store around the corner. It
Mm-hmm.
was fairly affordable, especially compared to going to the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure Aaron was the same, but like I was renting at least one video, if not several, every week, like
Mm.
just
Oh
to
yeah,
watch
of course.
different things. Often renting the same thing over and over again to the point where it would have been cheaper just to buy the bloody thing in the first
Mm.
place.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I agree. I think that that's certainly an aspect of it, and like the because I owned several VHS tapes, but it's like I can't think of any of them that are like any of my favorite. We got beyond T2, obviously. But like this, but for the most part, like I have certain movies that I've certainly watched plenty of times that I know on
Mm.
VHS, but I would say like those are the ones that like still rank high in my all time favorites. Grosse Pointe Blank I never even owned on VHS. Just
Oh
saw it
wow. Okay.
eventually, and then I once it's 97, so like DVDs are coming in like 4 years from now on a more
Yeah.
regular basis.
Yeah.
So I had that for sure, obviously, and then the Blu-ray came out, which is terrible, and they need to release a new one, but whatever.
Yeah.
But I
True.
I have it, so
And I think a lot of that, like the experience you're talking about, Hugh, maybe DVD for us because of those extra features, and especially as cinephiles, right? You
Yeah.
get so much more opportunity to relate to the movie, to be invested in the movie through those features that you couldn't get anywhere else, and that
Yeah.
made a huge difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I think you're right. I think very much clear generational thing, definitely, without a doubt. Even though I was renting as much as you guys were in the 80s, it was definitely a different sense of not just ownership of the moment, but also the sense of discovery as well, because you suddenly had access to things you couldn't get any other way. And I mean, I'll never forget early 90s when one of my friends who'd gone to Baltimore for university, and he came back for the summer holidays, and he was like, "You got to see this, man! You got to see this!" And he pulls out a NTSC official VHS release of Reservoir Dogs. And he's like, "You got to see this," and I'm like, "Okay, let's do this. Let's do this." We go down into the basement, into the TV room that his parents have, and we put this in, and we just sit there, and it's just. There's just it takes you. It's as you say. It stops being special later on because everyone does that. Everyone's got a VHS player. Everyone's in there. Somebody walks in while you're doing it, and I'll get out of here. I'm trying to watch a movie. Blah blah blah. Whereas we didn't have. We had a bit more. Sometimes we had a bit more freedom to do that sort of thing, I think. But yeah, to take us back to Grosse Pointe Blank, I mean, this is where the scene that we're in, we are in an old people's home. So I guess the conversation about age is appropriate.
I was about to ask: Is this podcast usually rely on elaborate ways for Dev to say that you're old? Is that
no, he just does it anyway. That's the relationship.
That has been the relationship the entire time. Yeah. I don't need a podcast excuse.
No, you absolutely have never needed a podcast excuse. Although to be fair, I think when we first met and we interviewed you as a vox pop for a member of the public at that film festival, I think at that point you were polite. Didn't last long. So yes, correction. Not necessarily old people's home. It's actually kind of hard to tell if is it just an old people's home, or is it also mental health? It's kind of hard to tell if it's a bit of both.
Yeah, I feel like it's just an assisted living facility.
Yeah,
that'd be my take on it.
Yeah,
there's a lot of people who seem fairly, able to take care of themselves, and it's just that they're there. And I feel like I'm kind of curious what intervention led to her being placed here, like whether it was like neighborly concern or something like that. Because obviously this is usually a place that either somebody chooses to go on their own or family direct them to, but obviously that wasn't the case here, given Martin's unaware of where she is now. So
yeah, it is odd, and we never find out.
And we do never find out.
Yeah,
it's a questionable element of a movie that otherwise airtight. I do wonder. It's like he seems like a guy who has the abilities to keep track of certain things like this, and the fact that he's so surprised that not only is his home entirely gone and burned down and turned into a grocery store, a convenience store. His mother is gone, somewhere else. He had to find that out. Like that's unless he was just, which I guess that's the only way to explain it. He was willingly pushing himself away from anything Grosse Pointe related to the point where he just didn't have any updates on it. It does seem like some of the information he could have easily had beforehand.
And Marcella gets the information for him easily enough when he asks for it. I think it's maybe not Grosse Pointe as a whole, but very definitely his family. I think that he really doesn't have a particularly good relationship with them when he leaves, and doesn't do anything to try and bridge that gap. I think he kind of tries to absolve himself emotionally by sending that money back home that he mentions in this scene. And beyond that, he's kind of like, well, I've done my duty as a son. I'm sending money home to take care of them. And I think that's where he feels like the responsibility ended, until he comes back to town and he feels like he has to check in on his parents, and it feels very much like it's a societal norm obligation rather than a familial obligation.
I mean, I also imagine that given the job he does, there is probably a point in time where Marcella's doing all of the taking care of business, making sure the money goes and everything, and he's just, has it gone? Yeah, okay, well, just signing checks. Do you know what I mean? I imagine it gets to that point. Like a lot of people in that kind of office lifestyle, that has been being satirized within the film, and then the realization that it's not going where it is probably reported to him by her.
Yeah.
And then that's what leads us to where we are now. Interestingly enough, that fourth draft script that we got hold of just simply calls it a nursing home generically. They don't even specify what Mary's actually suffering from. They say she suffers from Alzheimer's or something just as debilitating. So, the key issue for them is, how that state relates to Martin rather than just, the character as a whole.
And this minute in particular, I feel is a turning point in the film. I was joking with Aaron before we started this that it's this pretty terrible minutes to be in, but this is the first kind of kick that Martin gets. Right, this is he's gone to see his mother. He's kind of got a sense that it's maybe not all sunshine and roses, but this is the minute where she has an episode, she has a relapse, and the entire conversation changes very suddenly, and it suddenly gets quite heavy. She's kind of lost the plot of what was being talked about, and doesn't remember who he is again. And I think any of us who have interacted with people with Alzheimer's or with dementia are very, very familiar with this kind of behavior pattern, and just that kick in the stomach that you get every time it happens, no matter how many times it happens, because it's just like you're losing the person all over again.
You excuse me, at this point in the movie, like, you having already revealed the house situation with him, like, you're before that point, you're with Martin, kind of, he's getting a kick out of the idea of being back home again. Like, it's fun. There's a fun, because he hasn't been there, and he lives such a unique life where it's like, this is alien to me. I'm in my hometown. What am I doing here? But I'm seeing, there's Mrs. K, and I'm seeing all these people, and now
he's driving down the high street, seeing all the changes in the stores and stuff with this kind of wonder in his eyes.
He's got his face is lit up, and it's neat. But then you get to things get grounded way back to reality all of a sudden for him. And a movie where he's been this cool cat for the past 20 minutes. You're like watching it now, and it's like, okay, now there's it's getting grounded in a pretty heavy way. And it's reshaping, like, what's his move here? What's his play? Is he going? And although it doesn't lead to him being like, well, I guess I got to kill that guy. He gets deeper into his procrastination as far as like, let me deal with the whole Debbie situation, which we'll get to. Like, that's like, I need to deal with the actual things that matter here. I can't just I have to take Marcella's advice and actually do something in this town.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it's to elaborate on your point there, Aaron. I feel like as you say, we've seen him be cool. We've seen him be in control, and we've seen him slowly lose control, but within a professional environment where it's not always the thing that he could have controlled. And it's that whole thing of that military view of the plan doesn't survive contact with the enemy. He has these things that happen, and something unexpected will come in, but of course it's his job to then roll with that. Whereas here, this is not just unexpected, this is completely outside of his wheelhouse, completely outside of both his skill set but also his emotional wheelhouse. How do you deal with something like that? And I think it's interesting. It's also one of the scenes in which physically he's not as jittery as we've seen him early on. He's very, yes, he is finding things to do with his hands, but there are points where he is quite still and just taking things in a kind of almost wide-eyed sense of it's not just maybe disbelief. I'm not sure, but I find that interesting. I think if there's one thing that's interesting about this film for me, in many ways, going back to it this time, is seeing the very, very finely graded tones of the way that Cusack performs. You know, even though there's all the tics and sort of styles and moments that we associate with him over the years, especially verbally, stuff like this is kind of, you know, this is him going way above and beyond what the needs of this sort of film.
Yeah, the bit where he asks about, what happened to the money in the house, and she starts describing it to him, and he already knows the story before she even starts, gets out more than a sentence, and he takes his hand, he just he just rubs both of his eyes with two fingers. It's just, like, there's just moments like that of him registering things in a way where it's like it's taking him out of his routine and into a different, more personal place that he wasn't necessarily expecting.
Yeah, and I'm not sure he wanted to go back to either. Discomfort is definitely clear. It is what he's doing.
He also doesn't want. I would wager he doesn't want to admit to Dr. Oatman that you were right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. True. That's absolutely not something he wants to do. Yeah, fair point. Oh, wow. So as we roll through the minute, we move from the conversation with her where she knows who he is, and as you say, she tells him some of the backstory again, some of which we suspect he already knows via Marcella, and it's very much the mood, despite the golden light from the window outside. This is a slightly darker side of the room. You feel like in addition to the emotional side, there's a gathering gloom, if you like, a little bit. And then the movement of her to the wheelchair I find quite interesting, because it just emphasizes and reinforces her the state she is now in, and the fact that he can do nothing.
Yeah.
He is completely devoid of any ability to aid her. And that's really quite heartbreaking, looking back on it that way. I certainly didn't feel that way when I was younger. I just took it as this is what it is. But yeah, I know better now.
Like the next scene we'll talk about in another minute. But that left the stronger impact on me when I was younger watching this. Now when I see this, it's the helplessness that really gets to you, where he has no option here. Like, even if he can't just give money, that's not going to do anything at this point. There's nothing else here, and he's lost that time, which he's gonna, he's obviously reckoning with that by being here in general and dealing with Debbie and everything. But that's another aspect of his life where, because he made choices, there's a life that he's not living now, and that's something he can't get back in any way, which makes it, as I've gotten older, makes it very depressing to think about. What the other version of that would have been if he didn't do certain things.
I suppose I ought to really keep this thought for another episode, but I'm going to broach it here because I think it's something that, as we go through the film, we can actually address properly. But just very, very briefly, it has just struck me that depression, that reality, that helplessness is one of the reasons we have such a resurgence in hitmen, coming back out of domesticity in movies now. Leaving aside the fact that 8711 are, absolutely have found a formula that they can crash out every couple of years, whether it's a John Wick or a Nobody or what have you. But the popularity of those films, I can. We've said on previous episodes with other guests that this is not really a film that it could be remade, but whether it would work is in the way that it does is a whole other question. But I can see that thematically this idea could work quite well now. I imagine there's a lot of people who are that bit older now and would associate with the catharsis that will come later on in the film. But
I mean, there's a romanticism to the assassin world that's
always
that's honestly always been, since the 60s, with like La Samurai, Melville, and you go like Tokyo Drifter.
Oh, so good.
Brandon to Kill. Like there's a way that they depict the lifestyle, which is, if anything, exactly the opposite of what an actual assassin would be. But putting that onto film, yes, that's all. That there's a way to do that. That certainly you can attack a lot of different themes through this kind of person. That is, it's sexy to watch on camera, but it also allows any writer, director, actor, what have you, to dig into other ideas through that. And yeah, we got away from that for a while because I think the post Tarantino world after Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, like that, it made it such a ubiquitous thing where like everybody was like, yeah, this is a great idea. This is a great way to like cash in on something that's cool right now, but also we can do our own thing with it. That went away for a while because hey, there's other things that became more popular. But yeah, things work in cycles, and John Wick among other things happens, and here we are again, like dealing with more Nobody. It's another like I feel like a very akin to this kind of thing where like that movie's more like midlife crisis, where this is more I don't know the
30-something realization.
The 20-30s angst. Like having literally a homecoming. But regardless, like it has been neat to see like hitman comedy kind of stuff or dark comedies with hitmen as assassin characters. That's back in the scheme of things again. I loved Fincher's The Killer, for example, just recently because I think it's less about like the hitman aspect of it and more about like the existential nature of what this man is doing and where he exists in society and whatnot. Like there's just ways to play with it that I feel like filmmakers love exploring.
Absolutely. Right. So, Dev.
Do we want to just quickly talk about the song that starts up at the end of this minute, or should we save that for tomorrow's minute?
What is it? Because I was trying to find it too. Because again, I was trying to do the work. I couldn't find the name of the song.
I also could not find this. It sounds like it's The Clash to me, but I
figure it's like it's just Strummer like doing part of the music for the movie. Like
it could be.
Right. I think in that case, should we leave it for the next episode? Because I know I have somewhere a couple of articles I picked up in the research looking at Strummer. So let's pick that up.
Let's hold it. Okay. Fair enough.
Well, then I will say about this minute. Then I do love because it comes back later. I love the line, "You're a handsome devil. What's your name?" That's a great little bit of business right there that Mark picks up on later on.
Yeah. Just heartbreaking and brilliant and clever all at the same time, and delivered beautifully.
Mm-hmm. And I think probably it feels like something he probably heard as a kid growing up as well from her.
Yeah,
like it's one of those phrases that she's just always said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a thing in the script about when she, earlier in the previous minutes where she's talking about his dad, and she refers to him as they broke the mold when they made him. So I can imagine her saying that to the dad, saying, who's a handsome devil, and as you say, something he hears, and now of course it's him, and the weirdness of all of that. Oh dear, but yeah, as you say, good bit of business in the writing there. Okie dokie. So, time to wrap up. This was minute 26 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio, 79.5 FM, featuring hosts, co-writers, co-producers, Dev Soligar and myself, Hugh David.
Today's guest, and our guest all of this week, is Aaron Neuwirth of Out Now with Aaron and Abe. Where can we find you, Aaron?
Well, I do write for We Live Entertainment for movie reviews. I write for a site called Why So Blue for Criterion and Blu-ray reviews. I'm on Twitter at Aaron's PS4, and my personal blog, thecodeiszeek.com. Everything I do and every work that I have ends up over there.
Cool.
Fantastic. You can find us on all good podcast players, as well as on YouTube, X, aka Twitter, and Spotify. And for all of those, it is at Debi Radio. That is DEBI Radio, as well as on our website, debiradio.com. And again, all of those is DEBI Radio.
If you want to actually come and talk with us, then you can always join the Facebook listeners group, which is also Debi Radio, 79.5 FM, this time with the addition of the words fan club. Yes, that classic of the past, because these days nobody's got a fan club. Everyone just follows everyone on social media. But you can join us in the old way of doing things. Debi Radio, DEBI Radio, 79.5 FM fan club on Facebook.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling.